And I learned that I had enough strength and discipline to do something different to untrap me. The thing about it is, with all things in life, whether it's pressure, whether it's handling emotions, whether it's choosing to endure or get past difficult situations, the things that could be our downfall, those weaknesses, can be turned into strengths to reverse the narrative. Welcome to Literary Deep Dives and Discussions with me, A.L. Iskey, the author of the Unseen Operative series. You have 12 hours between all of your obligations, work, school, home, all of it, to get it all done. And we're going to throw in 6 things on top of it that you were not expecting that require all of your concentration. What tasks did you just think of? And what emotions did you feel while thinking about them? Did you have some anxiety maybe some stress, and maybe some panic? Whatever the emotions were, behind them, the ultimate stimulus or root cause of that is the sensation called pressure. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Now, whether this is pressure on writing, reading, publishing, marketing, school, work, home, health, relationships, friends, etc., there are certain expectations, certain emotions, certain responses that we all kind of associate with it. All of us have this pressure, whatever it's coming from. It's almost a constant in one sense or another, kind of like change. We can count on there being some sort of pressure. But what does pressure actually do to us, for us, or in us? And is it always bad? Today I'm going to present a couple perspectives on pressure that may help you with any of those aspects of life, but as a disclaimer, I am not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. All the things being discussed in this podcast are really just my own observations that have come from my own writing, research, my life, etc. All I'm doing is inviting consideration of other perspectives on ideas and phenomena such as pressure. I'm not prescribing, I'm not diagnosing, and I'm not trying to set any standards of irrefutable evidence before you. All of this is just to stimulate the mind. With that, we're going to begin a bit from The Fallacy Web, my second book. Chapter 1 of this book, for anybody who's picked up a copy, first off, thank you. But once you get past the prologue, Chapter 1 is absolutely loaded. I do a little bit of a dump to kind of catch you up to speed with what Azure is going through. And there's one thing that should come to mind as you're trying to suck in all this information, and that is pressure. She is in the middle of an accelerated training that is really demanding everything from her 24/7. She has just been through external training. She's in the middle of compliance training. She has commissionary training yet to go under the course of a year. And just for a very, very loose comparison, that's like trying to cram the police academy with the FBI, with the CIA, with a little bit of secret ops on the top of it. And hey, maybe international relations. It's completely unrealistic to cram into that amount of time. But I do address the plausibility of it, as well as why it has to occur and why there's nuances to how much she is and isn't learning in the book. But for now, just know there's a lot of pressure on her. And that's not even yet considering her life as a dream walker, meaning all of her nights are also scrutinized heavily. She's watched 24/7 to make sure that she is doing her job, staying within certain standards, as well as they are establishing standards, because they've never really had, besides Alma Morales, a dream walking agent before. So yes, pressure. This is why it is such a topic on my mind. Now, at the start of the book, page 8, it depicts her feeling like she's walking on eggshells because of this constant scrutiny. It's pretty lonely. I think we all kind of feel a little bit of that when we're going through mass pressures, is this kind of sense of loneliness that even if others know about our pressures, they're not necessarily feeling it the way that we are. But there is a point to all of this. There's a point to feeling the pressure. There's a point to discussing pressure that is understated in the book. And that is that pressure does not actually control us. It only reveals where we have given it control. So just to bring this into perspective, let's start with one question. Is pressure inherently bad? Furthermore, does it always feel bad? The answer, at least your first answer, might be yes. But I want us to really, really stop and consider this. First, in a psychological sense, let's consider bike and car tires. Heck, even balloons can be thrown in here because, you see, there's a certain air pressure that enables these objects to be very useful, very sustainable, and even fun. Too little pressure and they lose their efficiency. Too much of it and, well, damage occurs, and sometimes even beyond themselves. The pressure of a very heavy object can cause bruising, it can cause injury, it can cause pain, but it can also be the very means of building enduring strength in things like weightlifting. In cases such as a massage, Pressure can be relaxing, even pleasurable. Pressure neither has a positive or a negative inherent value, so much as a phenomenon that can be utilized or associated with either. Pressure, by the way of physics, therefore, is a scalar quantity. But what about emotionally? What about mentally? What about socially? Most of us likely, when we were quite young, first were introduced to a concept called peer pressure. Bullying, being made fun of, things like that, even embarrassed. Likewise, we grew up having a set of rules or expectation to follow at home, at school, at church, at play, soccer leagues, whatever it was that we went into, and there were adults. And when you're a kid, learning to understand the world is built on a series of regulations, rules, and understandings that all involve some sort of pressure. And of course, with those comes rewards and punishments. And we know that if we don't follow the rules, that people get hurt, we get hurt, or we lose something in one sense or another. On the flip side, we can say that parents and sometimes teachers are absolutely devastated when those in their care go off on a whim and give in to peer pressure. Whether that peer pressure leads them to something that is very detrimental to their health, to their relationship with their family, or to any other aspects of life, such as embracing certain things that maybe cause a little rift at home. Likewise, we can say that youth growing up are very wary of the pressure of expectations from, again, their associates, their families, their teachers, to behave and to perform in certain ways in order to achieve certain things. As a society, the term pressure has an entirely negative connotation. It has become so villainized in the modern way of parenting that not only do you not pressure your child at all, sometimes you just don't do anything, don't even give them structure. They are discovering themselves, and we are just here to sit back, watch, and let them breathe. We simply provide for their experience, right? We're so valiant to stand up against pressures that we believe dictate our wills, tell us who we are, what we're meant to do, and yet we remain blind to the very reality that by so doing, we are actually creating pressures that do the very same things that we're avoiding, but in a different direction. Sometimes even worse, we take away all the pressures, and then we wonder why we're somehow less productive, less charitable, less connected as a society than previous generations. Now, I'm not trying to get into any specific ideologies here or politics at all. If you thought of some of those, that is purely your own association with them and your own experience. But I would like you to kind of hold on to those things for upcoming points in this video for consideration, because perception is pivotal to parts of pressure. But just for now, again, hold on to that. Just like the balanced pressure in a tire, social, emotional, and mental pressures are not all inherently bad. Certain necessary pressures drive life, the same way that blood pressure and balance keeps us upright and alive. The pressure to get your idea onto paper is necessary if writing a book is ever to actually occur. For many of us, the pressure that it takes to get into editing and publishing is absolutely necessary for it ever to become a book. I've had several authors on my podcast that have literally demonstrated real-life examples of how that sort of pressure helps them to really push past boundaries in order to finally publish their book. Pressure can be a positive difference, but I hope you'll see that perspective more as I keep talking throughout this episode. The point being, proper pressure propels growth, discipline, and action rather than destroying us. What is up with this? Well, the problem is not pressure, it's our perception of pressure. If we all took out a blank sheet of paper right now and just folded it neatly in half, on one side, you write out all the pressures in your life in this moment, and then on the other side, write out how many of these things have solid evidence of them being a reality. On that list, we could have a few types of pressures. We might have health pressures, financial pressures, education pressures, work pressures, book pressures, home pressures, choice pressures, relationship or family pressures, or specific life choice pressures. It could be even pressures that just happened for this week, today, of those things that we need to get done. Now, look at both of those sides. First, look at side one, then look at side two, and ask yourself how many of those pressures were actually supported. I would suggest that after filling out that second half of paper, you will find that the majority of pressures involve other individuals. Furthermore, most of those pressures will probably be based off of the expectations or preferences of those other individuals. You may discover the support that you wrote is actually based off of assumptions or assessments of those individuals' desires. Very few of these things, such as work, might actually have some substantial evidence of them being an admissible real-life pressure that is driving you, such as a quota deadline or certain regulations. Am I wrong? I don't know. Please drop a comment on it. I'd like to know your thoughts. This is a normal phenomenon. It's one that I write about, again, in my book. So here's an example that we can examine. The context is, again, the pressure of the accelerated training and the scrutiny around the main character. So let me find page 82. Here's the context, because I'm not going to read all of the pages of this. Azure Prescott, again, she's got all of those pressures on her, so she does the one thing that comes to her mind to deal with it, and that is to go on a crazy sprint. I won't get into the details of that. I will just say that in order to write this sprint, I learned how to sprint like this, and it was utterly exhausting. But she went on a sprint, and when she gets home, who is waiting for her at her stairs other than Detective Phineas Granger? This is what happens when she walks in. She frowned and closed the door behind her, looking at him narrowly. "I am in no mood for a lecture," she declared. "Splendid," he replied calmly. "I have none to give." Still frowning, Azure moved to her door, watching him closely, unconvinced. "Nor am I looking for unsolicited advice." Granger's dark eyes bore into hers, mildly blinking. "I can only presume that such has been your overt experience of late for you to assume that the reason for my waiting is that. However, I can assure you there also, for whatever it is you think unsolicited advice may be given, I have none presently prepared to give." She paused, putting her finger to her door, the print being read and unlocking with a faint click. "None? Very unusual. Then pray tell, why are you here?" Her immediate assumption was that the only reason he was there at all was to give her a lecture. Now, just to add a little more to this, it's in the middle of winter that she goes on this run. So there could be other plausible reasons that he's there, but of course, with all the scrutiny around her, that is her assumption that he is there to give her further scrutiny. When we look at others, especially when we are coming out of an extreme situation or just even considering the pressures that are bearing on us, we like to assess them and assume their motives based on that pressure. And how often is that assessment wrong? I would say that much of what we call pressure is actually our interpretation of events, in which we assign meaning to the other people's expectations. And our evidence, it comes mainly from our side. It comes from our understanding of the world, our upbringing, our personal experiences and expectations of how others should be treating us or a certain situation. It can also come from our fears of how they might react or a personal analysis of the person's motives. Just based on external cues and our biases, we assume those expectations, though they were never explicitly stated. And again, I would ask, going back to that piece of paper, how many times can you honestly say that any of that supportive evidence was anything other than assumptions based off of actions rather than things that were explicitly said? Now, another example might be how many of us get into a relationship with a friend, with a romantic partner, having some notion of having shared values or standards, only to find out some while later, even maybe significantly later, that certain situations, preferences, or practices of those values do not quite align. Maybe some actually are quite contrary to our expectations of how those values are supposed to be represented or acted upon. Perhaps you've even discussed those values, but being human, I mean, which of us has ever addressed every little bitty spectrum of said things? I'll give you an example. I am a very, very strong-willed person. I'm a very iron will set person. I know how to run my life. I have a very set standard of expectations of what running a home looks like. And there are certain things that just need to be done on a regular basis without, being asked or necessarily getting praise for it, such as doing the dishes, doing the laundry, sweeping the floor, etc., etc. Everybody pitches in to care for the whole of the house. That is my expectation. That is my understanding based off of my upbringing. You keep your stuff neat, you can keep it clean, and you can have it. So that is the pressure and expectation that I sort of assumed my husband had likewise grown up with. He didn't, not in the same way that I did. Now, does he value those things of having a clean home, having things organized? He absolutely does, but his expectations of how, when, and by whom these things occur were not necessarily the same as mine. I had no concept about that, of course, until little spiffs came up because I had this internal pressure to get these things done, and he didn't necessarily have the same pressure, but in my head, I thought he did. And so there was double pressure because I thought we were both on the same page, and yet it was really all me. Sometimes little spiffs can come from that, not necessarily in our relationship, but in relationships in general. But, how many times do spiffs happen because we're both operating on assumptions, acting under pressure that was perceived rather than real? Food for thought. Writers do this, of course, when they think about their readers. They think that their readers hold certain expectations without even having mass feedback on that one thing. Or sometimes even from minor feedback on one thing. Take, for example, beta readers. I do love beta readers, but not all beta readers are created equal. And not all beta readers are the right fit for your book or necessarily experienced in assessment. And sometimes authors have very different expectations for what beta readers are supposed to be doing. You get all this pressure when you get the feedback to alter your book, to switch your book, or otherwise to advertise your book according to those things that are said. I have even seen authors switch their genre based off of beta reader feedback. The moment we receive feedback, it creates an internal pressure. A further example, before publishing a book, we perceive pressure to get certain things done based off of a checklist. Usually it comes from social media expectations. We have editors, beta readers, ISBNs, ARC readers. I've seen things about virtual mailboxes lately that have been flying around. And all of these pressures and expectations are swirling around, pushing on us even before we publish a book, and sometimes even before we finished writing the book. And the thing is this, who or what is actually giving you these pressures? Who is actually explicitly expecting you, and I mean legitimately focusing on you and your success, to do these things in a proper order? For most of us, no one specifically or singularly is doing this. It's all in our heads, and a lot of it is pressure based off of comparison, which again is based off of assumptions. How many writers on social media do we perceive as successful because of the confidence in which they present themselves, as well as the material in which they are presenting? We perceive that expectation, and the emotions start to rise. The emotions to have things together, to be confident, to feel like we belong, to feel desired, loved, cared for, admired, all of those things. And we act on those emotions, as I've described in many podcasts. Whether it is a case of wanting something positive for yourself or if it's a case of discouragement, the point is this: our perception creates the emotion, and the emotional weight causes more pressure than the circumstance itself. Now, is that all bad? Again, no. Sometimes it can actually be a very good thing. Because if we come to this point as well, whether it's good or bad, we can do a little bit of a deeper dig into it. And that is that pressure reveals our motives, not theirs, ours. Maybe all of your life you've been told that it's others pressuring you. I think that is just the common narrative across the board. We assume that it's others pressuring you. But here I'm telling you that it's my perception of others and their expectations pressuring me. So it's actually me pressuring me, or better yet, something within me is pressuring me. What I'm asking in simple terms is, what is it behind your perception and your perceived pressures that matters to you? Something within you cares an awful lot to want to give into or even consider those pressures. Those pressures would not exist if there was not something within you that it was touching, something of value. So rather than asking, why are they pressuring me, or what are they pressuring me to do, I'm suggesting we turn inside and we ask, why do I care? What does this pressure do to me or for me? What motive or value within me is responding? Who will I become because of this pressure? The reality of the situation is this, and no one is inherently asking or making us to do something most of the time. Or those who are asking us to do things rarely care about the outcome being something unless it is in their favor. But something in us cares about them making that expectation. Now, a little bit of an extreme example to kind of drive this home, what I'm getting at here, is that nobody has the power to control you. So let's take a life and death case. Let's say that somebody has a gun up to your head. That's a lot of pressure. There's something that is demanded by this person. You feel that pressure, life and death. At some point, it is your choice to give in, to do that thing, unless you have literally lost voluntary control of your mouth and body, and I would say especially your mouth, because nobody can force the air out of you and your tongue to form the words, unless you have lost complete control of those things. At some point, the choice is yours to respond to the pressure, to consider the pressure. So why do you give in? You give in because something you value is on the line. And in this case, it is life. You value something about your life, or the very reality of being alive, more than you value whatever is being asked or pressured upon you to give up. So what does giving into that pressure do? It saves your life. Let's step away from the extreme to the everyday. Something inside of you is always looking for a balance. We are inherently built as human beings to seek homeostasis. Our bodies are ever trying to correct every imbalance that occurs to us. That comes from our nervous system, our cardiovascular, our skeletal system, all of these things. Everything within us is fighting to keep up a balance, to keep us alive. Now, your instinct, therefore, is to give in to pressures to, let's say, buy a product for bookmarking or writing, not because you're necessarily weak or uninformed, but maybe because you value being successful in launching your book. Maybe you value this book so much you want to give it the absolute best shot. Maybe you value not being a failure. Maybe it's about your ego. Maybe it's about feeling secure. Maybe it's because you really want to be prepared, because you value walking into something being knowledgeable. But whether we admit it or not, there's a little bit of FOMO as well as ego that usually drives our reasons for giving into pressure. But the value of FOMO alone is that we care about belonging. We care about connecting, we care about balancing and peace, and we care about doing well. Because balance isn't technically a stagnant state, and I think we all realize this deep down inside. It's a growing and glowing state, as I like to call it. A state of satisfaction and progression. That's what we're looking for. We know deep down inside that we need to grow in some way. We just would really like to be able to control that way. So we let certain pressures dictate, or rather influence, our decision making. Now, let's talk about the multiple competing pressures. How do you choose which to leave and which to take, or if any need to be taken at all? Again, by those same questions. What values or motives do I have for allowing these pressures to influence my decision making? Do I listen to these pressures to get house or homework done, or blow it off to do writing because that is what I care about more? Do I give into the pressures to change my story to match reader expectations or certain agent criterias, or do I keep it the way that I feel that it's supposed to be? Do I give into the pressure to have a specific word count, thereby sacrificing some of the story, or because I actually want to refine it down? Whether or not we've ever had the internal pressure to trash things, to start over, to give up, etc., the point is there is a motive and a value that you hold for that thing. And the pressure always seems to come from other people around us and sources around us. It is ultimately our motives and values that determine the effect. So, pressure never actually forces us. Unlike a tire, people still possess agency. Pressure influences, it does not determine. The choice remains ours. Therefore, the danger is allowing pressure to become your decision maker. I'm talking about shutting off your brain. And so many of us do this, especially nowadays. We allow the pressure or our perceptions of what's expected around us to shape our decisions without ever questioning, what are all the possibilities of what I could possibly do with this? We like to be what I call black and white thinkers, in the sense that we like minimal options. We like to know that there's a yes way and a no way. We want it to be that simple, yes or no, do or don't, try or don't try. And in reality, there are always thousands of options for every decision that can be made. I'll go back to my first book, The Lattice Game. Azure Prescott, she really believes that there's only two decisions to her entertaining Detective Granger's offer to join him on an extra case. She thinks either I go and I do it or I don't. When in reality, she comes to realize that, I can entertain this up to a point with, some boundaries and stipulations. There's always something within any given situation that we can control more than we think we can. We just need to really take a step back and consider all the factors that go in. Now, of course, again, on the danger of allowing pressure to become your decision maker, there are healthy and unhealthy ways to respond to and manage pressure. Again, healthy being considering all the values, considering all the motivations, considering all the options of how you can possibly handle this pressure. Some healthy ones may include going on a run, as did my main character. Exercise is a great way to alleviate pressure and to really clear your mind. But taken too far, it can become destructive. I've firsthand experienced both sides of that exercise coin. Pressure becomes unhealthy when we allow it to dictate our choices, control our emotions, shape our identity, determine our behavior, and when we let it replace the internal decision-making abilities that we as humans have. I think AI is a really great example of this. We feel a lot of pressure to get certain tasks done, and those tasks take time, and that time takes away time from doing other things that we either need to do for work, for school, for home, school being a huge one nowadays, that could really be streamlined if we just pass it off to things like AI. And as wonderful as those mechanisms and tools are at helping us to get things done quickly, the fact is, the more that you let it decide how to compose your email, how to compose your letter, how to compose your report, your book, etc., the less your brain is practicing those internal decision-making skills, those critical decision-making skills. And so you're essentially dumbing your ability down until there comes a certain point in time when you've become so reliant on that thing to do it for you that if that thing is taken away from an internet crash, etc., you are not able to compose it on your own. You've become unpracticed in that skill. If you don't use that skill, you lose that skill. And so that is what can happen. But that is just a small example. What I'm saying here is pressure in general. If we allow pressure to be the driving influence for why we make decisions, it can destroy us. I'm going to use a different literary example for this, and this comes from my book, Breaking Vows, A Diabolical Love Story, which is set to come out sometime this winter, I'm hoping. The premise of the book is that there is this woman, Chantel, who feels very pressured by her family to bring a date to their family game night. One thing leads to the next. Next thing she knows, he's proposing to her, and she feels pressured to say yes because of the setting in which the proposal was made. Now, I think that's a very relatable situation for a lot of people. You would be surprised how many people get pressured into saying yes. But she's also pressured to stay in that marriage because of something terrible that happens to her sister here in the Fallacy Web. The books are connected, but it is a standalone. That is her one pressure that triggers a series of events, which comes to my next point, that one surrender to pressure invites another. Just like dominoes. If you start letting pressure rule or dictate your decision-making processes in one area of your life, it always seeps through to other areas of your life. Even if you don't notice it, it's a very subtle thing. For Chantel in the book Breaking Vows, it started with that marriage thing, but then it starts to trickle into her home life. Every little thing from meal making to when do I get dressed, when do I shower, how do I talk to this person, how do I avoid this person, financials, and then work because they happen to work at the same place. And everything that she used to do normally is now slowly becoming a different thing altogether because of the pressure that she has to essentially end this marriage is her goal. Put an added layer of pressure in there by making certain laws that make it rather difficult to get out of a marriage unless certain circumstances occur. So she has that, but as you can see, it kind of dominoes. In everyday life, again, the AI was a great example, but if you start letting people's perceptions influence the way that you dress, you will soon become willing to let them dictate the way that you talk, the way that you see things, the way that you behave in certain situations, and the way that you understand who you are. And in time, that can go down all sorts of roads. Now, this is a very popular thing nowadays to kind of take this into an extreme, is that we look at things like religion, parents, certain types of people, certain communities, and we claim that they're all brainwashing us from pressure because we would rather blame the sources that we think are pressuring us. And sometimes they legitimately are, but for the most part, we would rather blame other people pressuring us than take accountability for allowing that pressure to dictate our decision-making. That has often been a hard thing for me to hear because sometimes I do honestly believe that what I'm being told in certain classes that is contradictory to my standards and observations of the world is the teacher or the curriculum trying to brainwash me into a certain political or social agenda. And so I make assumptions about them. And then I let that pressure that I think that they're pushing at me to build something up inside of me so that I become emotionally reactive and I do things because of that. We can get very fired up in our political and our social and our religious convictions because of a pressure that comes against us, a pressure we perceive. Maybe it feels real. But the reality again being, we don't actually know the other person's entire perspective, why they're saying or doing the things that they are. And sometimes we assume that because of the way that they're presenting things, that it is 100% their choice when, in the case of education, sometimes it's legitimately not if they want to keep their job. So they feel pressured to do things to keep their job. See, it's cyclical and it goes down with every person involved. Everybody is playing this war against perceived pressures as well as real pressures inside and around them. I haven't even started talking about actual physical chronic health pressures. The point being, surrender to one invites another. And That can be a good or a bad thing. I want us to always keep that in mind on the spectrum. I've been giving some very negative examples, again, because we live in a society where pressure has a negative connotation. This is how I was raised. This is how I automatically think. But if we want to spin it to the positive, this can have a very fantastic effect. Let's say that you give into the pressure to finally do something for your health. Today, I am going to exercise for the first time in forever. Maybe I might get there tomorrow, but I'm going to keep trying until I can get this thing. And so you start doing it, and then you start learning, okay, well, if I can push myself to get healthy in this way, maybe I can push myself to do better in this other part of life. I've learned discipline from exercise. I can therefore learn discipline in schoolwork, in my job, in the way that I speak to others. It can trickle into all sorts of things, and it often does, is the thing. When we start a cycle of allowing positive pressure to build momentum to do incredible things, we become a changed, better person. And actually, that does go into breaking vows as well, because we see Jason, the counterpart to Chantel, from the pressure that he's feeling inside of himself to be a better spouse, he becomes a better person. Again and again, much to her chagrin. It's a comedy, so yeah, definitely pick up a copy of that when it comes out. Assumed pressures are often stronger than real pressures. It's up to us to really weigh, based off of our values and the directions that we want to go, whether these pressures are leading us to do positive things or not. With that understanding, every pressure contains opportunity. Just like everything in this life is a choice. And that is kind of exciting, actually, that we have a choice to choose what to do with it. Negative pressures can produce discipline and resilience just as well as positive pressures. I want that to be an example as well. We look at any time that somebody experiences negative pressure as if it's always going to lead them down a bad road. But in reality, sometimes when we experience the bad side of things, we kind of learn that this isn't what I want, and we go to the good side of things. The first example of my life comes from my biological father. I was raised by a biological father who was very, very emotionally and sexually and mentally abusive to several individuals in my family. Before he even got to the major things that he did, he always had these very particular pressures that he put on us as children of how to live up to certain expectations, such as getting straight A's, such as you had to pick up this certain thing and keep this other thing in a certain way, or else the trash bag would come out. I would toss all your toys. Certain expectations of you don't ever say a bad word, and if you slip up at all, I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap, give you cold showers, things like that. I could go on and on. There was a thing that I learned from that, particularly from the way he expected us to behave in public and the way that he expected us to discipline ourselves in our education. My parents were not going to provide any penny for us to go to college, and some people might say that's terrible, but for me, I learned from his harsh expectations how to discipline myself, how to take care of everything that I needed in order to avoid whatever crap he was going to give. I learned how essentially to play a part, yes, but I also learned that I have the skills to act as needed to make myself successful. And if I can successfully survive in this situation, I can successfully navigate in every situation. And that has come to serve me brilliantly again and again. Much to his chagrin, it's turned back on him. So I cannot honestly sit here and say that the pressure that my abusive father gave me was all to my detriment, because if he hadn't have been the terrible person he was, I would not be the good person that I am. So that is just one example. Second example is an eating disorder. I did have an eating disorder. I had, at first, it was a restrictive eating disorder where I was legitimately afraid of food because it caused me physical pain. And somewhere along the lines of returning to the good old US of A, that became anorexia nervosa. And I can tell you, when I got married, I was not in the triple digits of weight. I weighed less than I weighed as a 12-year-old, and that was not okay. Things, again, letting perceptions, letting those pressures dictate my life that took me down a wrong hill. But because of those negative pressures that took me down that wrong hill, I learned that I could use the very same thing to get myself back up. I had learned the skills that trapped me, and I learned that I had enough strength and discipline to do something different to untrap me. The thing about it is, with all things in life, whether it's pressure, whether it's handling emotions, whether it's choosing to endure or get past difficult situations, the things that could be our downfall, those weaknesses, can be turned into strengths to reverse the narrative. It's all up to how we choose to see it and what we choose to do with it, as well as how it taps into our values. Those are examples about pressure contains opportunity in it. So yes, if you're at school, if you're at home, if you're on the internet, social media, and you feel like people are pressuring you to a certain perspective, maybe it feels like people are trying to have you go against the things that you value, against things that are precious to you, or you're feeling attacked, this is an opportunity. Now, it can be taken to the extreme where you become just as bad as them and pressuring them to back down, and that's not necessarily the answer. Giving in isn't necessarily the answer either. Consider that there is another opportunity somewhere in the middle or somewhere even beyond all of the options that you're currently presenting that can empower you to keep your values, to be strong, to still be friends, to maybe even produce a curious conversation that could be something meaningful. You never know, and sometimes, yes, walking away might be the biggest strength you need, but there is always an opportunity. Find it. Use it. Pressure should be evaluated and not obeyed. That is the summary of that. I think always taking a pause in all things that we consider in life is always the golden standard that I would say, be informed, don't be conformed, but also take pause to inform yourself. There is so much we can learn from just taking a moment to assess our feelings, our thoughts, our emotions. And when we take that time and pause to let ourselves speak to us, we can really kind of discover where the opportunity lies that empowers us to do more and to be more than we currently are, or even with who we are. So intentional living means choosing which pressure deserves influence. That is the ultimate conclusion that I really want to leave with you. In the fallacy web, that is an end that Azure comes to. And it's part of the reason why this book is so long, because she is not only dealing with those pressures at the start of the book, but more that come through along the way. Because life is not this one-dimensional thing that pressures are stagnant. There are always things that are going to get tossed in last minute, along the way, and so on and so forth. And those things can really shake up our world. Tiny bit of a spoiler, she comes to a decision that she has to really balance. What do I do when what I think I want to do isn't actually an option to me, and the people that I care about are the ones barring me? I feel pressured that I need to be a part of this thing, but also I feel pressure because I'm being pushed out. There's all those swirls of emotions, and she has to discover in herself, what can I do with the pressure that is right to my values? So yeah, if you haven't picked up your copy of The Fallacy Web, please do. If you need a discount copy, please check out my website. I have some fabulous discounts on there. And if you still can't afford it by any way, shape, or form, just contact me. I'm happy to give you a free copy for a free review, an honest review. Even if you don't like the book, I want to hear about it. My invitation for you is to really navigate the difference between thriving and merely reacting by learning to conscientiously decide which pressure deserves attention, which deserves rejection, and which deserve only consideration this week. Pressure, it is unavoidable. Whether it becomes a prison or a propulsion depends less on the pressure itself than on the meaning that we assign to it, the motives it exposes, and whether we allow it to make decisions for us. That is it for this week's literary deep dives and discussions. I hope that you all keep writing. I hope that you all keep evaluating, and I hope you all keep discovering meaning in your lives as we work together to support independent authors. So please subscribe to the channel, comment below your thoughts on any part of this discussion, and I will see you next week.